for your clients, do you oftentimes do you run into individuals who their expectations are, potentially a little greater in what they're hoping to see and change in, let's say, like measurements, for instance?
Yes, I would say that expectations are really the first thing that I'm addressing when I'm getting started with a client, to put things into better alignment of what is realistic for the timeline that they're wanting to have in place, the modalities that they would like to utilize in getting to that target goal. There are times where I have individuals who want to come and put on a considerable amount of muscle tissue, but they want to remain natural, not utilizing any PEDs, and they want to do it within about 6 months time frame. And I also want to compete at the end of the year. And then shortly after that, I would like to get pregnant. It's like, oh, okay, let's slow down here and get into a more realistic understanding of how these things would need to happen, and what, if you're wanting to get to this goal, let's really talk about this one specifically and what would be required there. And then we can talk about the other. But if we're just going to talk about these all in one tandem thing, that's going to be far too much. And so getting measurements into a great position when it's talking about the goals, but even more so within the measurements, because when we're talking about building muscle, it's a long time horizon. I mean, you can speak to this just as good as anyone, where you have been working to put on a considerable amount of muscle tissue for some time. And I'm sure that you've gotten the question of, when are you competing again? Like, it's been forever since you've competed. And in the reality of it all, it's like, it's not been that long. Like, you have taken the necessary amount of time to put on the real tissue that you have been working so hard for. Whereas you see a lot of competitors who label things of, I'm in season, I'm in a growth phase, now I'm back in season. And to competitors who are maybe newer, they're thinking of, okay, well, they put on X amount of muscle tissue from that show to that show, and it was just a year's time frame. I can do that. And there's so much more that goes into it when you're looking at what PEDs were utilized by that client, where's that person from a training age perspective. I mean, there is thing after thing that this list can become when we're just immediately looking at taking the tangible information from this post that a competitor made and then trying to apply it to ourselves.
Yes. And, the thing is, like, the PED side of, muscle growth is something that I think even within that, individuals' expectations are very much inflated. And it's a conversation that I had recently with a consultation client, talking about, like, well, okay, why didn't the scale weight drop off, for this competitor? And I actually knew the competitor. I had worked with her. I was aware of her cycle. I'm like, well, the weight's not going to go down if you never stop the cycle. If you just keep the drug in place, like, you're going to sustain that. And I think oftentimes what can happen is in those, like, very short sprints in between seasons, those 4, 6, 8 week push phases where the individual is trying to put on a considerable amount of muscle. There isn't the consideration really around their potential to build. So, the drug might be put in place, but ultimately, like, even if we're talking about 8 weeks for an athlete that is very much trained, how much muscle are they looking to add on? And are they in a state where their hormones will support them doing so? I think oftentimes people assume it's just the PED that they're missing, and that's the only part that they need, and sure, it's going to drive training performance. And if that was another one I wanted to touch on, is I really like using training performance alongside the rate of change on the scale, rate of change in the measurements, calipers, because ultimately, if that training performance is improving, not necessarily just load, but if we're seeing an improvement in the quality of each rep, it's promising. It's not to say that it's going to reflect a considerable amount of change, but it very well is what I want to see in someone who is trying to get the most out of that growth phase. But it just, on the side of PEDs, I mean, I think that is typically the thing that people are looking to throw in quickly to accelerate growth when, in reality, I think there is a lot that needs to be done internally. Physiologically, there are a lot of signals that have become dysregulated from being in that perma-dieted state. And, perma-diet, that's not to say that has to be multiple years. That could be a month of, or not a month, a year of being truly in deficit, like 52 weeks of being in a dieting type phase, many months of which, okay, you're at a low body fat percentage. So that signaling is going to become more and more further dysregulated. It's not good. It's not good. So tell me a little bit, tell me and listeners a little bit about what that conversation looks like for the athlete who comes to you, has these high aspirations, has these hard goals like, hey, I want to get on stage. Okay, we're in July. What is it? Nationals or USAs? We've still got time this year. Let's hit it. They just wrapped up a season, but they're like, okay, let's make the most of the next 2 months. But they don't want to gain body fat. They don't want to see scale weight go up very much at all.
So you're saying they're coming off of a prep, and then they're saying we want to just take 2 months and then get back into prep?
Yep, and they don't want to gain body fat in those 2 months. They want to hold the physique.
So this is an instance where I am going to get on a phone call with the potential client, because if they are my client already, we've had conversations that would be around this, and this would not be a question that would come from a current client of mine. So for the client who's reaching out and wanting to make this happen, I would illustrate the understanding of what they're trying to accomplish. Like, this is a very far-fetched, almost impossible goal that you're trying to attain, and you are putting it in very simplistic terms to make it feel far more attainable to yourself. And I want to give you the real context of what this is going to look like and how crazy this is. And oftentimes when I'm able to lay that out of what would somehow need to miraculously happen in a time frame that's never happened before for anyone. I mean, we can make people can make posts on social media and say it happened for them, but for it to truly happen and have all this muscle tissue built and regaining cycle, so on and so forth, it's just not going to be the case. And so teaching on that and giving that real explanation of what that would entail opens their eyes and gives them better overall perspective. It is a little bit of a downer to the competitor because they're excited. Like, they probably just came off of the stage, not getting the placing that they want, and they are very motivated by that immediate feedback, and they want to make the change right that moment. And the beautiful thing, and also very challenging thing with bodybuilding, is that it is a time game. You need to take the time necessary to put on the necessary tissue to be great on stage. And I also really vocalize to competitors that when we are dieting so frequently, we are making dieting more challenging on ourselves. We have to get more and more creative with how we're going to push the boundaries to get to that level of low body fat time again and doing it again. It's not going to be just a rinse and repeat process of, this is how I did it last time, and I'm going to take the exact same deficit, I'm going to take the exact same amount of cardio and just rinse and repeat. Like, that is not how this all works, because our body is tremendously intelligent, and we're going to get more efficient with the things that we're utilizing to take care of our body. And so we have to do different things each time. So honestly, the less that you are dieting, the less that you're competing, the more likely you are to be a great competitor, and one that can really see sustainable change over the long haul of your competition career. Like, if you are competing every single season, the amount of progress that you're going to make is minuscule, and you are going to have to fight tooth and nail to make that minuscule progress, not only in muscle density, but also in improvements in your conditioning. Like, both of those things are going to be very tough to make considerable improvements if you're doing it every single year. Like, I think the bare minimum would be competing every other year to see real change, and that person would have to be very diligent in the process of, I'm competing this year, and then I'm taking the latter half of that year and then all the next year completely off until I compete the following year. but I'm taking it very serious, tracking my food, having everything in place, just as if I was still in prep. Like that would be what you would have to demand out of yourself to make progress that quickly. And I just don't think that there are that many competitors that want to have that type of lifestyle. More often, they're going to want to have the situation where they compete, they love being that lean, and then now, oh my gosh, I don't want to put on more body fat, so I'm just going to get back into prep, but now I'm upset because I got the same placing, or I placed worse, or it was harder for me, I had to do more cardio, I had to get into a deeper deficit, and then now we have resentment to the sport. It's like, that's not the sport's fault. That is your guidance's fault, as well as you making poor decisions to put yourself in that position. And so we can have a much greater outlook on bodybuilding and the benefit that it can have in people's life if we just have a more strategic and thoughtful plan, and not just like, this is my crutch and I'm going to compete constantly so that I can stay in a leaner physique almost all the time.